Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, how are my snipers doing today? I hope you guys are doing fantastic. Listen, today we're talking about the one and only Jasmy coin. Now, you know me, I am super high on Jasmy. I think you can be getting very nice returns this cycle, despite what some people are saying. Look, ladies and gentlemen, we can see that in the last few days, we did have a sell off, right? 2 days ago or so, we pretty much had a doji type of reversal candle, and then you can see ever since then we have sold off roughly 16%, almost 17%. Now, here's the deal, people. Right, here's the deal. Something like Bitcoin absolutely exploded and went nuclear just the other day, right? Just the other day, Bitcoin did go nuclear, and this thing sold off a good amount. We can see we capped around $124,000, right? We pretty much swept the last relevant high of 123,000, and guess what? We sold off pretty much over $7,000, right? Seven to $7,500 we sold off. Now, for me, I'm not too concerned because this is just classic manipulation, and I do think we will be bouncing back. Now, of course, we did break structure, so there may be a period where things do look weak. If we do bounce up and we do look weak around 120 to 121,000, then there's a high chance that we do continue to sell off a little bit more, back down to 116K. And then obviously from there, we would have to see and monitor how everything is, right? It could be a similar scenario to kind of what happened in May, where we sold off, we broke structure, we were going up the last couple of days very weak, and then we just continued to sell off and we kind of went sideways. We can see overall, though, ladies and gentlemen, before we dive into Jasmine, because this is important, that Bitcoin is still above its structure, right? Bitcoin has been trending towards the upside, right? Clear as day that this is one zone pretty much between 100,000 and 111,000, and we can see that we're above it right now. And the next zone right now is pretty much, let's just say 123, 124K and 112K. So we are still very bullish, very bullish, and we will continue to be bullish until we really start seeing, you know, weak bear signs, or we start seeing weak bullish signs, and then we start coming back down to 101K. That's when things could be concerning, and that's when most likely the cycle would top out in terms of Bitcoin. And we can see, ladies and gentlemen, right, Bitcoin dominance has just been kind of lingering the last couple of days. We know that we need multiple closes below 60% for us to really get that confirmation and big sell off. But this weekly is just kind of not doing anything, right? It's just kind of going sideways. So we could see a couple more weeks where we just kind of do nothing before we officially sell off. And of course, if we break structure to the upside, right, then Bitcoin dominance could see a next leg potentially upwards of 70%, stalling out altcoin season just a little bit longer. But ladies and gentlemen, let's just dive into something like Jasmy first, right? We can see that when we go on something like the daily, we have key zones that we're looking at. We are looking at this high over here of 2 cents. Then we're looking at this lower high over here of roughly 1.9 cents. And of course, in recent times, we have this lower high of 1.85, right? So we can see that we are consistently creating lower highs, but we also are consistently creating higher lows. We can see, ladies and gentlemen, we have this low over here of just below a cent. Then we have another low down here of pretty much 1 cent. And then we have another low of 1.1, 1.2 cents. Now you might be thinking, well, why are you telling me this? Well, because, ladies and gentlemen, right, despite us being not able to be, us not being able to push price higher and failing, we are also in an interesting point where the demand is getting higher and higher, right? The demand is getting higher and higher. Now, I will say technically, right, despite there being some type of price action over here, right, despite there being some type of price action over here at 1.4 cents, we could technically go as low as down to here. As long as we stay below above 1.2 cents, we'll still be looking on track. We'll still be on track in terms of how the closes look, because we can see that this high over here of 1.9 cents is higher than, the 1.7, the 1.8, but we're just really looking at the edges, the key zones, All the middle stuff is just kind of more noise. We can see when we go to something like the weekly, right? It's pretty much perfect, right? It's pretty much perfect, right? We pretty much got down the bottoms, right? We have this weekly low here, higher weekly low, higher weekly low. At the moment, higher weekly low, but this can technically get mitigated. And then, of course, despite this actually being a higher high than this kind of counts as a equal high in a way. And we are overall, you can see, just going up, right? Boom, 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 and we're also going down generally speaking. So, we are getting sandwiched. Jasmine has to make a choice soon, and I really, really doubt after months of consolidation and sideways movement that we are going to be selling off to the downside because that would be very, and I mean extremely, extremely very alarming, right? Because that means if Jasmine is going down to the downside, that means a lot of altcoins are seeing new levels of lows that they've never seen before. Something like ICP would be $2, AKT would be 50 cents. Turbo would be back to the 0.002. XRP would probably go back down to $2, $1.50. Ondo would probably go back down to 50 cents. It'd be very, very alarming. And it just doesn't line up. It just simply does not line up with the structure, with the analysis, with the way the markets have been trending, right? With the amount of money we have in this cycle. Yeah, we are struggling right now. We might go a little bit lower in terms of total market cap, but I ultimately do believe that we are looking to be having more and more money. We also do know that mid-September there is going to be a rate cut. Rate cuts are good. We haven't had a rate cut in months. So we are going to have a very, very big rate cut of 0.50. Right? Usually it's 0.25, but in this case, it's going to be 0.50. So I expect some manipulation from now until the next month. Why? Because, ladies and gentlemen, they want you to go out. They want you to sell your positions before everything starts to flourish. Remember, usually when things are kind of looking 50-50, you're not too certain, is when the markets are just about to explode. We can see before Jasmy exploded, the markets were just going sideways. They were struggling for multiple weeks before they finally just exploded. And that is usually the case, people, right? That is usually the case. In terms of the monthly, right, we are looking okay. We are still technically trending to the upside. Obviously, we still have 2 weeks. A lot can play out, and we will continue to monitor everything. In terms of Jasmy's price action and price prediction, I do think that Jasmy should most likely be heading up super, super high. I personally am super big on structure. Super big on structure. So one of the zones I'd be looking for is pretty much 15 cents, which would be a little bit less than a 10x. Then the next zone, ladies and gentlemen, for me ultimately is 32 cents. I do believe Jasmy will sweep these highs of 32 cents. And I do believe we could even go upwards of something like 40 cents this cycle. We checked it before, right? We checked it before. 40 cents is not the craziest task for Jasmy. We can go right now, ladies and gentlemen, right? If we were simply to 10x, we would roughly be at 16 cents, 8 billion market cap. If we were to 20x, we would be at 32 cents, 16 billion market cap, which is not that crazy. 16 billion market cap for 32 cents is not crazy. So, like I said, 40 cents is very, very doable. And we can see when we go to the holders, we actually have been rising in holders very, very quickly. We're at 95,000, almost 300 holders. But that is ultimately it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you guys did enjoy, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Goodbye.